Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing live show number 334. And it is the last show of 2021. Had you asked me back in 2014 when we started all this, I would be saying that. I'd be like, what? We're just messing with some video. It is amazing to think that over the years we've been doing this. We didn't do it weekly in 2014. To be honest with you, it was sporadic here and there. But 2015, we really dialed into the weekly event programming. So we'll say we're starting from that point to watch the evolution of time, our expectations of what happens next and what to think of next and what's going on currently and so forth. And I also find it ironic, maybe it's because I'm getting older or not. We're celebrating New Year's for most of the what we call Western world or general world, but there are plenty of cultures that this isn't a chronological change in time. Chinese calendars, Hebrew calendars, all have different measurements as to when New Year's exists according to how they keep track of it. It is generally a consensus that this is the most acknowledged transition of time from one chronological year to the next. But it's not anything, when you think about it, different than a Friday, which is also a measurement of time, to a Saturday, which is also a measurement of time. It is the passage of time and what we think is going on. We have hinged a lot of what we make in the sense of decisions, resolutions, hopes, dreams, what have you, based on transition points like this. Our industry is no different. Our show today is about the year in review in general terms, kind of a skipping stone on a lake as to transitionally through the course of the year. We're not here to recount the news. There are some excellent shows up about the year in review, and they do it for so many different segments of the history of what we've gone through, science and politics and society and entertainment and what have you. We're not here to go back and see what happened in hospitality this past year. Mine's more of a short introspective as to our transition of how we looked at this year through the course of the year as it relates to our industry. And from that, what are we looking at in next year? And in preparation for today's show, I was looking at our show just like this, which was on the basically our first show of this year, which was live show 282. So you figure we're on 234 right now, 334 right now. Our first show of this year was show number 282. We've gone through our transitions of many co-hosts over the course of the years, really, and we'll go through a time cycle of our show for it. But I'm looking at the content that we were discussing on January 1st. That's how it landed, was the show on January 1st. I have Robert Cole and Dean Schmidt with me, and I'm seeing the news items that we're talking about. Obviously, COVID at that time, just the first COVID wave in participation in what was happening from the holidays, was the focal point of our discussion. But there was a lot of articles associated with what people are thinking about doing in 2021. Where do they think they're going to be traveling in 2021? We had no idea at that time, of course, what 2021 was going to be like. We had no idea the summer was going to be what it was going to be. There was reiterations of this, the stupid resistance to vaccines. Sorry, I'm being political when I say that, but again, logic doesn't reign on these circumstances. But we thought that we were optimistic. The vaccine had just been released. We're getting it into the public. We thought, wow, this is the year. This year will be our travel back to being what we were before COVID hit, the pandemic hit. And now we're at the end of the year. And I would like to say that optimism was false. We have a lot of ignorance in our society as to vaccinations, the value of vaccinations to society, and the ability to curb these types of medical issues. We've lost hundreds of thousands of people this year, in addition to the hundreds of thousands of people that we lost the year before due to this. And yes, you can say, well, you lose hundreds of thousands of people to other things, of course, but not preventable things as much. And so, yes, it is a bitterment that we have to say that at the end of this year, we are facing yet another wave of this pandemic in its new variation with the Omicron virus. And so very much looking at live show 282, January 1st, 2021, to a live show December 31st, 2021, we're in the same boat. Boy, I hope next year's better. Boy, I hope things look better. It was interesting, the progression of conversations, because as we went forward, in the shows. We tried to talk about what we'll do when, how we'll do this then. We had no sense of the pandemic's impact on people's mental health. We had no sense. We had a glimmering, but we had no sense on the impact of people's desire to come back as a workforce for hospitality. We thought that we would go back to what we used to do, which was very asimilar to the discussions of, well, this is what we job is we have, and this is what we pay for, and so forth. We did talk a little bit about the attrition of people that gave up working in hospitality, that because they couldn't find a job at the time because we were so shut down, that they were looking at other career options. And we talked about how the skill sets of hospitality really were productively helpful in other fields. And so we knew that that bleed off of talent from our industry was going to be a hard thing to come back from, because people would find that they would get better benefits and more compensation compared to what we as an industry were offering for the same skill sets. We had no sense of how much that was totally true. We had an inkling, but that was about it. So we went into January talking about all of the things that all of the organizations that were struggling to redefine their value, the brands, the destinations, the hopeful travel that would come from all of this, what people's hopes were, what their opinions were, but what they'd like to do. And of course, we had a lot of penned up, ooh, when I get to do this, I'm going to do this. And we saw a manifestation of that as the times for the year went by. I'm kind of going through as I'm talking about the different ways we discussed what was happening at the time. We talked about ownership and its changing role, landscape, and its influence of what's done with its brick and mortar ownership assets. How much are they looking at the brand for what the brand didn't do in 2020, what the brand should do for them in 2021? Strange as it is, at the end of 2021, they didn't do much either since then. They still are stumbling around. They're still throwing brand flavors out there. Well, let's see if we can make a brand flavor that appeases this demographic segment. Let's do a brand flavor that does this demographic segment. And I'm being critical when I say they're doing that so they can dilute their obligations to other previous brands that have bought areas that said, I'm going to be the Residence Inn in this area, to say, oh, yes, you can be the Residence Inn in this area, but we're going to create a new brand over here that will overlap your area because it's not the same brand. Only really because at the end of the day, all brands are really just franchisors. That's it. They're no longer hoteliers. And I defy anybody that works in brands to come and tell me that they have a different program for this. And yes, I've stood on this ground, and it's been a rally beating of the chest, knock me off the hill conversation. I see no difference in 2021 from where we entered the year to where we are now, that the brands have really re-identified their value proposition. We've seen, obviously, some successful rebounds, more than just what we saw in the summer surge. We saw that there was a progression of those companies that took to heart the opportunity to reevaluate their tech stacks, reevaluate their consumer sentiment engagement, and that they held true to themselves and rewarded their team members in such a way that they were loyal and stayed in spite of opportunities that were raised elsewhere. But those were few and far between. For the most part, everything I just said happened in reverse for so many businesses. There was a bleed off of skill and the skilled trained teams. Brands didn't improve what they were doing. They went back to what they used to do before with the same negative result. And yes, we as a society have artificially kept them propped up in value because there's too much money at stake for it to fail, so to speak. Too big to fail mentality, right? That sometimes we keep thinking that the brand should be what it is, because if we don't, then everything we've invested into it, and for franchisors, that's a lot. So we have to believe in it. We have to in for a penny, in for a pound kind of thing process to this. So January of this year was very similar to that thought processes over the course of time. Still a lot of conversations about recovery. How does this affect revenue management? Because now we were beginning to kind of sort through the rubble, as it were, and say, okay, with 2020 having been the year that it was, that this hit in March of 2020, we shut everything down. All those impacts happened. Politically, we went through a turmoil. We're not even going to go into the politics of January 2021. We went through this whole thing. We were trying to kind of sift through the rubble and wreckage to say, well, how are we going to figure this all out? How are we going to start doing revenue management when 2019's perception of 2020 was totally thrown out the window? But by the same token, we have to figure out what we're going to do for 2021 when it comes to revenue management. How are we going to do this? When should we begin? What kind of rating should we offer for? So from a marketing perspective, we had a lot of discussions about what you need to offer. We talked very much about cancellation capabilities, great rates, great offers, great availability. Take advantage of whatever it is that we can offer with the guarantee that you can cancel it should you have to change your plans because of how the world was so dynamically fluid and still is dynamically fluid. So there's a lot of opportunistic selling opportunities at this time earlier this year. I say at this time being December, I consider ourselves into the base of 2022. But at the beginning of this year, we looked at how can we spark that travel when travel was just beginning to think that because of the vaccinations, people will begin to travel. And, how soon will people travel? And yes, there was still international restrictions and people couldn't travel internationally. So we looked at all that international demand being kept inbound domestically. Canadian borders were still closed. There was nothing but what we could do inside. We knew the national park system was going to be heavily loaded because it was exterior outdoors. People were more likely safety-wise thinking they could still do that. They were overbooked with a lot of those things. A lot of strange secondary destinations that were not dense destinations like the New Yorks, the Miamis, and the Chicagos and Los Angeleses became in the forefront of, let's go there. There's probably not going to be a lot of people there. And so little do we know this was the research period. January is normally a research period for travel anyway, but this was the research period of people looking at what they're going to do when they got out, when they finally got to travel. And this was, little beknownst to us, the beginning, the nascent of the impact that we would see in summer. So as we go through January, lots of discussions of how to rethink our data stacks, our tech stacks, our information, how to figure out how we can best begin to look at what we can use as numbers. Where do we put a stick in the sand and let's say start from here kind of thing. Into February, we began to try to see success stories, places that got the first impact of the vaccinations, of people deciding to travel. In the sense of bookings for spring break and times that we knew people were having times off. Now, during all of this time, we saw this transitionally going from February into March. We saw a lot of change in politics in the sense of the emphasis on vaccination, the emphasis on mandating some controls to this, trying to get a handle around the safety of things going on compared to what was prior to that. Again, not trying to be political. And so we were looking at changing our strategies. One of the terms that we had used in our discussions February into March was changing it from a lighthouse to a lantern, was one of the topics that we kept pretty consistent in my perspective of how we talked about it. And that was, instead of being a beacon to come to, like, hey, come to me, visit me, this is what we have, this is what we are, this is what you need to know. Instead, it was the logic of saying, here, let me guide you to what you're interested in. Instead of coming to me because of what I am, let me help you get to where you want to go. It was a transition in perspective from our conversations in marketing. It was saying, instead of broadcasting destination, us, value to the destination, instead is, what are you looking for? And am I what you're looking for? And here's what I have that might be what you're looking for what you are searching. And it was a change in perspective of how we needed to be guest-centric again. It was kind of, as we described it and talked about it, a renaissance of discussion of getting back to the centricity of the customer, the heart of the hospitality concept of guest service. Instead of being the industry of, here we are, pay what we're demanding you to pay at the rates we want you to pay, take it or leave it, mentality to a, what is it you need? How is it that we can offer that to you? What information can we provide? Also during this time was a tremendous amount of perpetual discussion of safety protocols. I would say up to this point, then it transitioned that everybody wanted to not talk about safety. Like there was a fatigue about how we wear masks and how we wipe things down and how we keep things clean, which was most of the dialogue towards the latter part of 2020. We wanted to kind of bury those ads and say, let's not keep showing people in masks. Let's not keep showing people that we're wiping down elevator buttons. Let's not do that. and was the realization of, look, hospitality, housekeeping has changed. People don't want people in. We were trying to search and understand what guests were wanting. Like, do you want us to clean your room, or do you want us to be out of your room so you don't feel like we're breathing the same air as you? Blah, blah, blah. We were kind of fingers crossed going, I hope you don't want us to do a lot in the rooms, because we don't have a lot of housekeepers right now. And we don't have enough revenue to hire back all the housekeepers we think we would need at this time, not knowing that they weren't going to come back. We were just like, let's see if we can keep this leaner. So a lot of this was feeling out the regionality of the travel demand during the March-April period of this. And this kind of led us into a little bit more of what we got a taste of for demand come a lot of April. April, we got a real strong sense of what people were thinking for summer. At that point, there was a heightened optimism as to the vaccination schedule. There was already discussion of the fact that there was a 20 to 30% population or 40% population of people that are like, I ain't getting that stuff, or whatever stupid thing they were saying. And we knew there was going to be resistance to get us to that herd immunity. We kept talking about herd immunity. 80% of the people getting vaccinated, then that way it keeps the transmissible capabilities of that. Obviously, we didn't get to that. We started creating alternate numbers of, instead of people fully vaccinated, we were talking about the fact of who at least got one shot, trying to make some positive spin to the fact that somebody at least got a jab for this. But there was that ardent still aspect based on politicism that was like, we're not going to do this. That, of course, created the conversations of what was soon to be later in the year. So here we are. We get a sense from April that there was a lot of showings of drive market, very little air, because air was still considered dangerous. And, the whole fact that there was a restriction to how much was able to be available. There's a lot of inventory that wasn't being put into market from the domestic air travel. There wasn't a lot of planes that were in the air, so to speak. And so there wasn't a lot of scheduling that was going on, and people felt better by able to control themselves. We saw a huge, massive surge from 2020 to 2021 in RV sales and RV travel. Like, I can control my environment in my own little RV rather than going to some hotel or having to deal with travel in an airplane or what have you. So let's get an RV and do that. So it was a huge shift in how people traveled, as an example. But when April came around, we began seeing that drive market travel, immediate 150 mile, proximity 300 mile, and destination based, 300 mile plus, was a strong market strategy for your destination. So centric to what people were looking for, radiant to the people that were traveling to you, was a key way of marketing ourselves in April. And it was very in tune with how people's perception of summer travel. Obviously, people were still remote schooling for their kids and so forth. So the need to get out of the house was literally kerosene on fire. It was a necessary component for people's strategy. I got to get out of this house. We got to do something different than being here 24/7 with the kids or what have you. We also lost a huge amount of labor force because there was no alternative for some families, because they didn't have the daycare. Daycares were closed and shut down for the most part, and very few were coming back or being allowed to come back. So a lot of parents were faced with the fact that one of them had to stop the income level to take care of the kids at home, because the kids couldn't be at home during the daytime all the time without the parents there, especially certain age groups. Which, by the way, was a great marketing target, because you knew if any family had age groups below a certain age, their likelihood was that they were home more often than not. So aspirational travel through those demographics was a strong suit. And boy, was it. Come summertime, we really rolled into a tsunami, was the term often used, of demand into the summer. It was summer vacation plus. Things were sold out. For the hotels that didn't respond quick enough, they sold a lot of low-rated space. For the hotels that were quick to respond, they were able to marginalize their revenue management very quickly. It had nothing to do with forecasting. It was a free-for-all of how much can we reestablish our high rates to a absurd level. So many places did rates on the back door, which is the legal limit that the hotel can sell a particular room for, is what's listed on the back door, with diminished service. So not only were people willing to pay the highest rate available for that hotel room required by law, but the restaurants weren't open if they had restaurants or food service. Breakfast wasn't available for places that offer breakfast or in some limited fashion. Amenities like spas and fitness rooms and so forth either had limitations or completely unavailable, and yet they were paying premium prices. The, the flashback from that was we also went into this completely unprepared staff-wise. We did not have the staff necessary to handle that type of occupancy. And with rate came expectation. And a lot of people were incredibly upset for what they're being asked to pay, the conditions of which they had to buy non-refundables and so forth, buy it or lose it kind of mentality, and then get diminished amenities, and then on top of it, diminished service. Yeah, no, we're not going to clean your room every day. Here's some sheets left outside the door. You put the sheets on. I'm dropping $600, $800, $900 for a room that I got to put sheets on the bed. Really? So you got a lot of negative feedback, and a lot of companies, not wisely, ignored that, saying, "Hey, tough. We got to make up all this money we didn't have this past year and a half to this point." And that's an attitude that a lot of ownerships, poor managed ownerships, focused on was, we're just going to maximize the rate, minimize overhead costs, and eat the negativity with, hey, it's tough. That's what we have right now, and this is what you're going to pay. Not thinking about the damaging long-term effect. Now, this is my personal opinion to this, because, yeah, I'm bashing people that went over and just went for the money rather than the service. Some hotels balanced that, and they made accommodations according to that and gave compensation for people that had bad experiences or gave value propositions of future. They thought about the long-term impact. They took the time to respond to people's negative comments about them so that people felt at least they were heard, which often solved a lot of it. People were logically understanding. They hit hotels that had diminished staff, limited service capabilities, and yet they were in such high demand that they were able to ask for high rates and get them. Not that people didn't understand that, they're not happy with it, but it's not like they didn't understand it. Just listening to them say they're disappointed with that often appeased a lot of people, but a lot of hotels didn't do that because two reasons. One, they weren't equipped to do that, and two, they didn't care. And so they damaged their long-term reputation in many, many ways, which is now becoming evident in lots of ways as we see the ramifications of that even at the end of the year that it happened. So summer was a massive push, massive demand. Free for all, making hay, get as much money as you can, do everything you can to try to make up for the losses that we suffered for the past year and a half-ish at that point, year and a quarter-ish at that point. Coffee. So we rolled through summer with that, and in the process of that, come along July, we started hearing about a variation. Why is this variation? Because we weren't vaccinated to the level necessary. Again, thanks to those people. It was terrible, and we got a whole new wave of something that created more pain and loss and suffering for people, the Delta variant. And it was something that, because of the way things work in science, I'm not here to count on science, we're faced with a new wave of something that happened because of the traveling, the interactions, the blatant disregard of people not getting vaccinated, the idiocy of that, and the impact of it being now allowed to mutate to a level that now created more pain and despair for people. That was July to August. It pretty much slowed down and constrained the summer tsunami. Now, nobody knew at that point, back in July, when this began to creep into the conversation, into the news, into the impacting into people's lives, what September was going to look like. It was like, oh my gosh, this is just making hay, making hay, making hay. And we had some anticipation based on, again, stupid politics. Oh, we're going to make people go back to school whether they want to or not, blah, 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 and so forth and so on. There was the anticipation that school was going to have its normal impact on travel demand, which was kids back to school, family travel was going to slow down. And the non-family empty nesters, whatever category you want to create for them, were going to surge in because it was their turn to travel without the displacement of family travel and the demand pricing that created. Unfortunately, due to Delta, that never happened because it choked on all travel demand at that point. We still had decent traffic. We still had good travel. We just didn't have as much as was potentially available because of the Delta impact on people's travel considerations and safety protocols. Europe still wasn't open up. Canada wasn't still open up. It was all domestic. Domestic flights really began to come into more of their own. They weren't still up to full capacity, but they were getting close to. And it was now a combination of, well, how can we get these last people vaccinated? How can we get over the humps? How soon is international travel going to open up? What's the impact going to be on domestic demand? And we were all looking for segments of our travel to come back again, like, can corporate travel begin to respond? We acknowledged in September that corporate travel did not budget any corporate travel in 2021. So any travel would be exceptional travel, meaning it is so well worth to have an unbudgeted travel expense for whatever reason than what we had budgeted before, which would be normal business travel. That was the condition a lot of companies were facing. It's like, okay, we don't have this in the budget. From last year deciding whether we were going to shutter the doors and cut costs and try to weather the storm like so many bad companies did, companies that were incapable of doing anything else, I guess, too, to throw into that, versus other companies that said we're going to exercise every option we have to maintain our team and go through this as best we can with the monies that we have until we have no more monies, like the better companies did, to now deciding how are we going to yield our opportunities. And so we were looking for team. What happened was just the reverse. All these people were scrambling, trying to get in the summer that we couldn't find enough people. There was no international travel, so we didn't have international employees and so forth. So we thought September is like, well, we're going to really try to go and try to get more staff. And a lot of companies just do what they always do. Here's my position. I need you to lift 100 pounds for 30 minutes, stand on your feet for 6 hours plus, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Nobody's interested in that. They were able to go over and say, well, this company over here offers me benefits on day one, offers me an hourly rate that's $15 or plus. You're not even offering that. You don't even tell me what you're offering. Okay. And I get weekends off, which is something you can't even begin to talk to me about until I've sweated my butt off for you for 3 years or 5 years. So a lot of people had no interest in coming back to hospitality, even though the availabilities were there, even though the skilled positions were there. Not a lot of people came back. On top of that was just the reverse. The Great Resignation started in September, where people were like, wow, now that I've had a year and a half to realize what I want to do wasn't what I was doing, or what I was doing was not what I was happy with, or what I was doing was not getting me anywhere, or whatever it was in the decision process, it was decided they didn't want to do what they were doing at the time. And we had a lot of people, again, on top leave, 4 million plus in September. And again, in October, we had a lot of people just like, nope, not going to do this. This is not worth it to me anymore. And this is a part of the mental health programs that we went through. This is a part of the how we as an industry ran our industry in the sense of our human resources in general. I mean, there's always exceptions to any of these conversations. And as much as I'm dogging on certain politicals and brands and so forth, there's always great examples of success with it as well. But the idea of it was that we went through this process of reevaluation of what we were doing. November, just last month, international travel finally opened up. Canada opened up in international travel to Europe. Now, to be accurate, we did have Europe open up earlier than that, which was to great backlash because in Europe at the time, tourism could come in, but nobody could leave. So what you got was the ugly tourist walking around, waving a finger, taking pictures of stuff, while the population there had to literally sit inside and look down on them and go, really? You get to walk around, I don't? Really? So there's a lot of not people interested in travel as much. Some people just took advantage of the opportunity to have that. We had great discussions on the show about the economic strata of who just took advantage of what they were able to do because they had the money to do it. So we had lots of discussions of it. In our show history, in July, we made a fundamental change. I made a fundamental change in changing our diversity of guest hosts that came on the show, and we talked about whatever topically we wanted to talk about. Robert Cole came up with a list of newsworthy articles that we could refer to from time to time. We'd have guest hosts on that were talking about whatever it is particularly that they were doing. We listened to feedback we got from a lot of our listeners that said, hey, look, I love your banter and your dialogue and your back and forth and your different perspectives and stuff. But I just don't know what to expect when the show's running. And because it's 2 hours long, I don't have the 2 hours just to wait and wonder. So if I knew what you were going to talk about, and if it was maybe less time, then I could dedicate knowing I was going to listen to the show. And we heard this pretty persistently. So we had gotten into a position where we didn't feel it was worth it to do it the way it was continued being done. So come August, I transitioned over to single topic, 1 hour. And to alleviate the randomness of hosts or the scheduling of them and so forth and so on, I've been running the show myself since August with that template in place of one topic, 1 hour. And we try to keep to it now and persistently for that. I have been reaching out for new co-hosts for us to bring in that will talk more specifically to what they're doing. But I don't want to make it a platform of self-promotion. I want to stay away from that. And sales, which is not what the purpose of the show is. We have many years ago, 8 years ago plus, I decided that we weren't going to worry about sponsorships and or ads or anything like this, because then it tailors the fact that we have to be nicer to those people that give us money. And this is not the purpose of the show. The purpose of the show is to bring relevant weekly content about hospitality marketing. To that end, we will be adding, starting next week, a new variation to our discussion where it won't be so general as to single topic, as it is more topically related about what we should be considering from our marketing perspective that week that we're coming into, based on, and this came from literally this show's production time. As I look through the log of all the shows and the topics of what we did for each show, I looked at it and say, wow, there's a kind of a, history is bound to repeat itself kind of mentality. And we did. If we have this look at, I can remember the optimism January of this year. I remember the uncertainty of February and March. I remember the certainty of strategy in April. I remember the amazement of business in May, June. I remember the frustration of July, August. I remember the anticipation of September. I remember the excitement of November and the disappointment of this month with the Omicron variant coming in because of, yet again, lack of vaccinations and what have you. So with that, I'm thinking, rather than just put a smile and say, boy, I just hope 2022 is next year, is better, is to say, you know what, let's look at each week as that week exists. What should we think about that week? Now, it's not that we hadn't done it this past year, but I think more so this upcoming year, a more pragmatic this week, not news of, well, such and such company bought such and such company. We try to keep it that only if it only affected your business. And, it's not that those things don't affect your business, but sometimes talking about what other people are doing successfully and or marketing that is successful for it, it helps in the sense that you can go over and react to it. So we're going to spend a little more time next year on talking about what to do that particular week for marketing. To that end, I think we've done our year review. We're up to this point now. We are where we are based on the Omicron variant. We know pretty much looking into January, we are going to have this continued reaction to people's traveling over the holidays. And I think, and this is no difference to them, to anyone that traveled, the bottled up, we're going to take this holiday, we're going to do it anyway. We're just going to be as safe as we can. Yes, Omicron is Omicron. We don't know the full extent, blah, 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 whatever it is. People still push through in their travel plans for the holidays. With that in mind, coming into January, the likelihood is, and I'm not trying to be a fortune teller on this, we'll probably see bad numbers for the next few weeks, as sad as it sounds. And I'm not trying to diminish that those numbers are people. But it will have an effect on people's travel interest. January is normally a planning for travel month. Weather has this effect on people. Winter has hit a lot of people. We have a heat wave in the Midwest right now, and we have a heat wave here in the Southeast. And so the impact of weather, where like last year, Dallas was dealing with a snow blizzard that wiped out their power. This year, they're sitting around with tropical drinks in hand, sitting outside with an umbrella on because it's hot. So with January, it will have a planning stage again, much like it did this beginning of this year. People will probably begin looking at what they are thinking about doing for spring break. Where schools were closed last year and virtual learning was in place, I think as much as it is being reintroduced and there's a mix of this, there is a mix of this compared to last year. That there is more of a blend of where kids will go to school, but there might be some blending of it depending upon the regionality of the impact of the virus at that point, which is something I think we've learned this past year more so than in 2020, and that is we can't be general in saying the U.S. is doing this or the world is doing this. We can say Southwest Florida is doing this and Nashville's doing that and Dallas is doing this. There is a fractional, by the way, Richard, hi, I didn't mean not to recognize you, but great to see you. There is a regionality to the impacts. What we have to, and we've discussed this on the live show many times, is be fluid in our dynamic ability to calculate what we need to do next. We talked about dynamic budgeting. We talked about marketing based on relevancy and response and value propositions and how to create that top-down impact. Like if we did conditionals of whether we lose a segment or a segment doesn't come back to its full capacity or a channel is not being as productive as predicted, what do you do and what do you have already planned for? That strategic planning of what you do in case of certain variations is more now critical than ever. And as much as we were optimistic at the beginning of this year, we're entering this year with the same optimism. That's what New Year transitions usually do for us. But there's a certain reality we have to consider, a lesson learned from history. As optimistic as we were in January of this year for whatever we were doing, whether it was the political high of transition, which, as we saw on the 6th, didn't work out so well. But the whole idea of what we thought was going to happen versus the reality of what happened. What's probably going to happen is January is still going to be a strong planning month. It'll also probably have a negative impact as to the news that comes out. If borders close again or if restrictions in travel come again, it will come probably slowly. There will be some anticipation as to spring break travel yet again because of the fact that kids will probably still be going to school in the majority of numbers in that sense. We won't have probably countrywide lockdowns. We might have regional restrictions depending upon the state and area that you're living in and the type of governor you have or whatever. But for the most part, we'll probably have fluctuations as to it. There is discussions of whether or not requiring vaccinations for different types of travel, like domestic air travel. We might see that as a strong impact on domestic air travel demand. For those who appreciate that, they're probably going to be more willing to travel, which might be the majority of people. In circumstances, we might actually see a surge because of it, because people feel good about the fact that it's finally being enforced. By the same token, we might see a negative impact for people that are frustrated that they even have to wear a mask anyway, silly as they are. So we'll see transitions, but we need to plan for them. We need to have expectations of those. So with that, I want to leave one little small tidbit of conversation that I've been working on, which has been kind of fun. It came from actually our live show from 2 months ago about dynamic budget creation. I had mentioned that there was a methodology to creating average weighted mean values. In the discussion we had in the live show, and I brought up the notes when I was first looking to research this show, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we should actually hit that a little harder, especially since we're rolling into the new year. The need to be adaptive to your budgeting. We talked about platforms that do dynamic budgeting that can change top line revenues that automatically calculate the operational impact, flow through impact of that, and also the testing of variations in income sources, the loss of domestic travel for flights, or the loss of paid campaigns, or corporate channel, or Smurf, or what have you, depending upon restrictions on group meetings and so forth. We talked about how to calculate all that, but one thing we mentioned was average weighted mean for information. We said that looking at year over year is statistically irrelevant because the actuals of 2020 and the actuals of 2021 do not solicit a repetitive business cycle process. We're not going to have the same summer of 2022 that we had in 2021. I'm not saying we can't. I'm just saying unlikely, given that we might have other business waves that are more traditional, spring break being one of them. Summer will still always be a high demand, high travel potential, depending upon the current circumstances at the time that it's happening and what's affecting the news at that time. But likelihood is we're going to have other aspects of travel come back into our strategy for 2022. With that, we need to have a good mathematical means to not average out, as in sense homogenize the numbers, but to standardize reference points. There's a difference between flattening on averages and flattening out averages that create markers for consistent performance. And hear me on this. When you're doing averages, you're basically diluting spikes and valleys. You're creating an average mean. The highs and the lows come to a center point of consistency between the two. That is good for some things, but not good for what we need. What we need is values that are related to the amount that they represent in comparison to the amount another net member represents. So each one has to be weighted. So in other words, say for instance, 2018, you had an ADR of $250, but your occupancy was 90%. So that means you did a lot of revenue business, okay, at $250. Now, say for instance, 2019, your ADR was $300 and you did 50% occupancy. Revenue-wise, you did about the same. Volume of business was different. Why? Because your occupancy was different. So the impact of ADR and your occupancy means that you would have to have a weighted average. How many rooms did you sell at 250? How many rooms did you sell at 150? How many rooms did you sell at 300? And that would mean that each one would have a percentage value equal to, different from each other, and that would create a weighted average, okay? In that case, a weighted ADR. Same goes for occupancy. Same goes for what's called value per conversion on this. And these are all calculated by taking your length of stays, your occupancies, and your ADRs for a variety of years. I recommend going back 2 years prior to COVID, 18-19, in COVID, 2021, and then if you want to throw your forecast of 22 in comparison to that to see, is it realistic that you're margining up too high or you're just averaging numbers up based on percentage growth? I would, it's an either or, but I would take the forecast in 22 out and use it as a measuring stick. What this creates is what's called a benchmark that says this is based on all the historicals prior and during of COVID. Your benchmark ADR is this, your benchmark ADR of occupancy is this, and your benchmark length of stay is this, and your benchmark value per conversion is this. Why is value of conversion per conversion important? I'll tell you in just a second. So you've created a benchmark. So everything about 2022 is either at, below, or above the benchmark. Are we going to perform better than the average weighted ADR? Are we going to perform worse than the weighted ADR? Meaning, based on 4 years before and during, are we going to be better or worse? It's a benchmark for that purpose. The value per conversion is a critical component because that is determined by your weighted ADR and your weighted occupancy. So it fluctuates depending upon your actualization of what goes into 2022. So take in case that your value per conversion is, say, based on length of stay, based on your ADR and so forth, $500. So for every transaction you get, it's actually worth $500. 2-day stay, blah, 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 whatever it is you work out to, your value is $500. Okay. You then go in and take that and say, okay, so based on, let's go for paid traffic on the internet. You're going to go do Google paid advertisement, Bing paid advertisement. You look at your words that are used in your advertisement campaigns, your keywords that you will be assigning your ad campaigns towards, and you take your top 10 or 15 keywords and you say, okay, these are the most often used words in relationship to finding and discovering my product. How many people use these words? Okay. Total. Well, you create the same weighted average. Your number one keyword might have a certain number of usages. Number two keyword, certain number of usages. So each of those keywords have a proportionate value based on the volume of traffic they represent. So you assign that weighted average overall. You say position key one, number of words, or number of usages. Now, keyword number two, number of traffic. And you create a weighted average. And that comes up with an aggregate number of keywords of searches. Between all of them, based on their ranking, because the first ones are the more important, you come up with a weighted average of this is how many searches for the top 10 words that I'm used for, which is 80% of my search travel that comes to me. How many searches? Say it's 25,000, okay, a month. because you're doing a monthly cycle. So 25,000 people use these terms to find my product most of the time. When I do the weighted average per keyword, it's because of the value. How much does it cost me for those keywords? Position number 1 might cost me $5 a click. Position number 10 might only cost me 50 cents a click. So I weight it according to the amount of traffic that each of those represent. And I get what's called a weighted average CPC. How much on average for the overall traffic of the top 10 keywords do I get at what price? And so I get an aggregate cost per click between all those top 10 keywords. So now I can begin to calculate what my expense will be needing. How many people, based on voice, percentage of people that I can get in front of that 25,000, how much is it going to cost me at the average cost per click? Okay, say it's $1.50. So my average cost per click is $1.50 for 25,000 people. So 10% of the people is 2,500 people. So to get in front of 10% of the people, 2,500 people, I need to spend $1.43 per click. But here's where the math starts coming in. How many people actually go from there that I get exposed to? They see my site, they see my ad primarily. How many people actually click on it? Well, that percentage usually is around 10, 15, 20%, depends on variables, but say 10%. So out of the 2,500 people, if I'm going for an audience of 2,500 people, out of the 25,000, 10% of them, and 10% of them click on me, that means 250 people clicked onto my ad. How many of those convert? Oh, industry averages, or you have actual data averages. Say it's 2%, say 3%. Let's just be nice and say 3% of the people do that. So at 250 people, okay, I get 9 people that actually book. Well, now that weighted value per conversion comes into play. If 9 people booked, that means 9 times 500. Okay, so $4,500 I made. For how much did I spend? Well, we have that average CPC of $1.43 to get in front of that many people at 10% value. So at $1.43 per click, I have to spend probably around $45, $50 to get that. So the value of conversion acquisition is $50 to get that acquisition. So you have to balance that to the total revenue. At $50 of $500 transition, that's a 10% cost, 10-to-1 ratio. Okay, so that $50 that I spent to get that $500 sale, multiplied up. So now then you begin to extend the math. So for every 10% of the 25,000, it's going to cost me X dollars at $50 per acquisition to acquire the $500 transaction, the 10-to-1 ratio. So my budget for 50% of the audience would be $2,500. So with $2,500, I'm expected to make $50,000 or $75,000. The idea is this is how the math works. Well, obviously, those numbers change as your actuals begin to come in. You math this out as a benchmark, and then from your actual production, you decide whether you're performing under that benchmark, at that benchmark, or above. And that is what creates dynamic budgeting. It also creates great budgeting control because this can be applied to things like meta search, paid ad campaigns, paid social campaigns. All the things that you are looking for an ROI calculation based on funding, you can base this on this type of math. So that is my treat treasure for you for the end of the year as a functional of dynamic budgeting. Going into next year is don't do what you've always done in previous years prior to COVID, especially where you took off the budget of whatever year it was, raced out that year, added 5%, 7% because of optimism or pessimism, upped all those numbers because of the top line revenue you think that you're trying to create for it, tell your revenue manager to find the channels that it's supposed to be contributing from, and then put it back on the shelf. That is no longer a viable means of strategic marketing and budgeting. It has to be fluid, it has to be persistent, and it has to always be consistently measured in its performance of at, below, or above benchmarks based on aggregate numbers of this and previous years to come up with some reference point as to your success on your strategy of forecasting. One thing that also happened this year for us in the live show was that we created our own TV channel. It started early in the part of the year, and we've been slow to change it over. We have been looking for a variety of content. And then we get a lot of biased, or not biased, but single contents categories. I wanted to be reflective of the entire industry. The channel is Hospitality Channel. And you can find it on your Roku TV, your Apple TV, your Android TV, your Amazon Prime TV. It's a channel you can look just like anything, Netflix, all of HGTV or whatever. And it's a channel dedicated to the industry. It's not about being a food channel, telling you restaurant, diners, drive-ins, dives, kind of stuff. It's not a travel channel saying come visit such and such. It's a channel dedicated to our industry. A chance that if you want to learn about tech stacks or RMS strategies and systems, you can. If you want to hear about success of how to open up a restaurant, you're hearing from somebody that's opened a restaurant. If you want to hear about proper banquet procedures, it's somebody that's showing you this. It's like Netflix in the sense that you pay the $4.99 a month for the subscription, and in it you get content that you can choose and on-demand watch. But it's also a free component. The live show, this show, runs on it on the free side all the time. By just simply getting the channel, you can watch the show on your TV without having to listen to it on your computer and or your phone. Now, this channel also exists on Android, iOS as an app, and also on Apple iOS as an app. So we're also on there. We have always, on the live show, simulcasted ourselves on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, all the social channels, in addition to a channel that we've talked about briefly, but I'll be talking about more in the coming year, and that is Twitch. Twitch is remarkable. Just from its newness and its capabilities, I put it in the same category as TikTok, which, by the way, has displaced Google as the #1 website. Imagine the volume necessary to do that, considering how much we use Google. There's more time spent on TikTok than there is on Google right now. That's impressive. 2021's number was Google, Facebook, YouTube, and kind of went from there. This year, it's TikTok, Google, Facebook, TikTok, up top. That's how influential this channel has become. Yet we as an industry do little with this. And it's really because it's not a set and forget, advertise and push it up there, retarget people, blah, 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 like Facebook has become. It's really, you got to make good content for people to be engaged with it. If they engage with it, it is gasoline on a fire. It's amazing the virility of it. But anyway, the reason why I bring this up is that we simulcast on Twitch our show. So if you're on Twitch, you can actually watch this. Twitch is an amazing platform. We'll talk again more this next year. We've talked about it briefly earlier this month. We'll talk more about it as the coming weeks come on. As a vehicle for voice, a chance to have a more personal dialogue with guests, which is, in my sense, for 2022 predictions, something we need to get to. We need to solidify not just rates and dates and product and service, but what are we to you and what can we do better? That mentality that we went into the summer with that got lost in the money grab, we need to get back to that of how is it that I can personalize my engagement with you? How can I create content that you are interested in so that you are interested in dialoguing with me about further business? That part, I think, will be the successful ends to these things. Yes, we'll have brands that will do saturation campaigns. Yes, we'll do entities and destinations that will talk about the virility of what is valuable for them and why you need to be there, and people will follow it like lemmings. And yes, they'll be successful. And yes, there will be plenty of copycats that think because it was done that way, they should do it as well. They're not very innovative. They follow whatever is done by somebody else. They're not the first to do it. They're the last to do it. And usually just because it's been proven, so it's less risk. Because of the politics inside about saying, well, how much does it cost? How much am I going to make off of it? And who else is doing it? So I don't get blamed for being the first to do it. It's a terrible strategy in C-level conversations, but it's a real conversation in C-level conversations all the time. And yes, that's what probably makes them successful is they don't overtly risk their funding. But no, it doesn't make them good at what they do as it is they make them follow patterns of other people. But I probably digress in my conversation to that. So yes, this year did bring on our TV channel. Yes, I would love for you to subscribe to it. Yes, I would love it if you give me suggestions of what kind of content you would like to see on it, as also on the show. Our podcast review today for the show will also include a little bit of our podcast reviews, which are much more tool-centric for anybody that listens to our podcast as well. We will be talking a little bit about our tools that we've talked about this past year, their usabilities and the successes that I've used them for, rather than just their introduction of what they're available to do, but how I've actually used them and been successful with them. So it'll be kind of a fun dialogue with that. There are some more transitions in the way. We are going to be looking for a new host for our revenue management podcast. Or host. We might do a rotating host system for our revenue management podcast, as also our sales podcast, as also our reputation marketing podcast. And depending upon what Dean's mood is like, we might either retool the meta search podcast and or just begin to diversify its value proposition. So we'll see how all that goes. So a lot of changes for our shows that might be coming up. As also for this show, we'll begin to introduce guest speakers specific to topics. We're going to start expanding that. I really wanted to just run out the rest of this year with the new platform of 1 hour, one topic. We'll keep to the 1 hour, one topic, but now we'll diversify the top people that are talking about it. So for everyone that has been loyal and faithful and watches us on the show in 39 countries, we do continue to translate this in 11 languages under the closed captioning. We love the diversification of everyone that watches and listens and responds and communicates with us and gives us feedback. We appreciate that so very much. I do, being we, out of all of that. And for everyone that's been with us for we're in our 8th year now, that started with us in 2014 till now, mostly in 2015 forward when we did it weekly. I thank you so much for your patronage and all of that, and your continued viewership and listenership of the show. And again, I hope that you join us and participate with us in the coming months, weeks, and years to come as we continue to do this. And I wish everyone a very happy new year and a successful and healthy and safe new year that will hopefully be a turning point for most of us in what we do. So with that, thank you, Richard. Thank you so very much for having been with me today on the chat, especially on the main show, and for I never say people's names internationally correct, but thank you all for being on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter with us as well in the conversations. So again, happiest of New Year's. Talk to you next week, January, Brian Spankin, brand new year, where we'll start hitting hard on some of the weekly topic conversation as well. So with that, Happy New Year, everyone. Do take care and be safe.